Wait just a little bit, see if some more folks check in. Hope you're all having a good evening. Okay, we're up to 6 or so watching now, so we'll go ahead and start. We're going to be in Genesis chapter 32 this evening. Jacob is on his way back to his family, back to the land of promise. He knows when he gets there, he'll have to deal with his brother Esau, his estranged brother Esau. And good to know PD and Robin are here. Hopefully Wally and Thelma are as well. So they'll get back when Jacob gets back with his wives and children and all of his other company to the land of promise. He will have to deal with he'll have to deal with the animosity, the kind of the wrath of Esau at the deception that Jacob committed on his way out of town. So Esau still possibly angry. We don't know yet. It's helpful sometimes in these stories to try to imagine them as if you've never read them before. It helps with the good Wally and Thelma are here, Ray and Tammy, Sherry, and I'm sure some others. So when we go through these stories, of course, we know how things turn out, and sometimes that lets us skip over the difficulties. It lets us skip over the suspenseful plot points in the story because we know that it all works out in the end. Kind of like watching a Cary Grant movie. You know he's not going to get killed because you don't kill Cary Grant. But even more so, it's because you've already seen the movie before. So you've already read the stories before, and you know that things work out reasonably well for Jacob. But this is a frightful moment in his life as the story is presented to us. He is returning back home. He's kind of burned his bridges to a large extent. He didn't feel like he could stay with Laban anyway, but for now, it would really be difficult to go back and dwell with Laban. And going forward and going into the homeland, returning to his family is not easy either because in that place he has burned some bridges on his way out of there the first time. So he has to prepare for this return and do so in fear, actually. So let's start looking in Genesis chapter 32. We'll read verses 1 through 8. Now, as Jacob went on his way, the angels of God met him. Jacob said when he saw them, "This is God's camp." So he named that place Mahanaim. Then Jacob sent messengers before him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. He also commanded them, saying, "Thus you shall say to my lord Esau, Thus says your servant Jacob, I have sojourned with Laban and stayed until now. I have oxen and donkeys and flocks, and male and female servants, and I have sent to tell my Lord, that I may find favor in your sight. The messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to your brother Esau, and furthermore, he is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people who were with him, and the flocks, and the herds, and the camels into two companies. For he said, if Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the company which is left will escape. So we sense a little bit of both reassurance, but fear as well. As Jacob is returning to his homeland, he gets the reassurance of the presence of God, the presence of angels, as he is journeying home. And that is a sign that God has blessed his return, that this is within the scope of God's will for him in his life. And so he can journey on. But that doesn't allay all of his fears. That doesn't take everything away. What Jacob did when he left home was avoid conflict with his brother Esau. He did not necessarily resolve that conflict. He avoided it. And it's something that in life we do sometimes, and sometimes it works out. If we can just avoid a bad situation or a difficult situation for a time, it may resolve itself on its other end. The other people involved may get over their anger, or whatever, something happens coincidentally to the situation to help resolve the situation. But Jacob left the conflict with Esau. He did not resolve the conflict with Esau. And now he's returning home. And the absence of resolution of the conflict is now plaguing his mind as he re-enters the promised land, as he at least approaches it. And we see Jacob taking a very vulnerable position here. We see Jacob kind of like a old hound dog showing you his belly. He wants you to rub it, but he wants you to know he's not a threat either. So don't attack him. And Jacob is coming in, and he's, you are the Lord, Esau. I am the servant. When we mean Lord here, we're not talking about a theological being, or a divine being, but just a person of greater power, greater status than Jacob is claiming to have, at least at this point. He is accepting and conferring upon himself an inferior status to his older brother Esau, to try to mitigate any anger Esau may still be feeling. And he also lays out his whole plight, his whole situation. I've been with Laban the whole time. I'm returning back with my wives, my children, my flocks, my herds, all my wealth. We are a family unit moving together, men, women, and children. And I don't know exactly what response he wanted to hear from Esau. He did not hear the one that he wanted to, or at least the response was one that creates fear within him. Esau says, okay, I'll come meet you with 400 of my men. And, in the storytelling, it's a neat little plot twist here, a writing technique to create suspense, create tension. The powerful man is arriving with a good-sized army, and it doesn't really matter exactly how many people are in Jacob's company, including how many men, how many slaves that could fight for him are there with him. Because he has his wives and his children, because he's laden down with all the goods he possesses and all the flocks and all the herds, he is vulnerable to a fighting force. He's vulnerable to 400 armed fit men coming after him. And he makes this military decision to split my company in case one company, half the company gets devastated. I'll still have the other company. It may escape and preserve the lineage of his family. Um, Years ago, I was watching some kind of show on television about the military, and they were showing how they all would eat, like a company or a platoon would eat when they were kind of out on patrol in a dangerous area. Maybe this was from the Vietnam era. I'm not sure, but maybe they're out in the jungle, a platoon of soldiers, and they've stopped to eat, and they would have every item of the meal set up on a different table in a different place, spaced apart, and the troops were all trained to eat apart from one another rather than right next to each other, rather than commiserating with their buddies. They had to split up and go in their different directions within sight of each other, but away from each other. And that was made clear during the video that was to if somebody attacks, they can't kill everybody at once. So not that they can't be killed, but they can't all be killed at once. And that's kind of a brutal way of living. I think it shows the danger and the discomfort of life in the military, perhaps. And it is heartbreaking, really, when you think about it, that same basic mentality is being applied from one brother coming to visit another. If you went to visit your sibling and feared that you would lose everything that you had, including your family members, they're going to kill my family and take everything I have. That's a regrettable situation, isn't it? That's just not what we want. It's not how we want families to interact with one another. And yet that's the situation we find Jacob and Esau in. Jacob in, at least, perceiving this danger, perceiving the fear, threat that Esau poses to him. And again, it's not just the 400 fighting men, although that's a pretty fearful prospect. It's also just the total vulnerability. I haven't seen it lately, but every now and then you'll see, I guess part of it's the pandemic, so this isn't happening as much. But sometimes around the beginning of the school year or the semester or something like that, you'll see a car driving. Usually it's a little bit older car, and it has laundry baskets and hangers and every type of clothes you can imagine. It has everything a young person owns as he or she is driving off to college. They've got every item of clothing, every CD. Kids don't have CD anymore, but their iPods and their iPads and their all of their material possessions loaded in. And that car, sometimes the suspension is suffering a little bit from the fact that there's so much stuff inside the car, and they're trying to, get settled into their new accommodations at their dorm or their apartment or their college when they get there. Well, this is a much bigger deal than that. This is the U-Haul truck that's bottomed out because it's loaded so heavily, and towing a U-Haul trailer with it, and just everything Jacob owns is in motion, is in transit. And something that big of an undertaking is not going to be very agile. It's not going to be you can't just move it around real easily, and you can't protect it very easily. So it is incredibly vulnerable. Jacob had left his family, his mother and father, empty-handed, empty-pocketed, basically, but with the blessing of his father. Not just a blessing stolen from Esau by deceit with his mother, stolen from Isaac, but a knowing blessing Isaac has given Jacob. But Jacob leaves the imagery. He's taking nothing with him, really. And he comes back 20 years later into the promised land with everything. He leaves with nothing. He comes back with everything. And with all of that wealth and with all of those blessings, there is kind of an offsetting, if you will, vulnerability that goes with it. It's hard to have everything and not have a target on your back as well. And especially in motion, especially traveling. Talked about when Jacob left, he was vulnerable because he was traveling alone. Now he's vulnerable because he's traveling with women and children and all of this wealth, all these animals, all of these things. And when Esau responds, I'm coming with 400 fighting men, that can mean a lot of different things, doesn't it? Can it? I mean, that can mean I'm coming to take your wives, your children, or kill your wives and your children and take all of your material possessions. It can mean that. It can mean something very different, something much more positive, and evidently that's how it turns out. Again, I don't want to get too far ahead, and if you know the story already, you know the fears that Jacob has are not realized, but he senses his vulnerability, and he takes precautions against that. He takes a method not to make himself invulnerable, not to make himself exempt from the dangers of Esau's fighting force, but to mitigate potential damages, to limit potential damages. If I get snake bit on my arm, I cut my arm off so I don't die. Well, that's kind of what he's doing here. He's if he goes after one company, I'll have half of my family, half of my possessions that will have a chance to escape and still be mine. Just really, in a sense, a very sad and tragic situation that Jacob has this fear to reunite with his brother. And we talked a little bit about this last week, but Jacob is, through the first part of the story, a very deceitful person, a very exploiting person, an opportunistic person who takes advantage of the frailties of others, the weaknesses of others. And here he is frail, here he is weak, and he knows the dangers he's facing because he has exploited those types of dangers, those types of weaknesses before. He's been on the kind of the other end, and now he's on the side of being the potential victim. So he shows his belly, basically. He shows his weakness and his subservient attitude towards Esau. And he also still has fear and takes steps to mitigate whatever threat Esau has. He can't prevent it, but he can kind of maybe keep the damages to a minimum. So let's go on now to verses 9 through verse 12. And this is a prayer. Jacob said, "O God of my father Abraham and God, my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your relatives, and I will prosper you. I am unworthy of all the loving kindness and of all the faithfulness which you have shown your servant. For with my staff only I crossed the Jordan, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he will come and attack me and the mothers with the children. For you said, I will surely prosper you and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which is too great to be numbered." Okay, Jacob is a guy who doesn't mind taking matters into his own hands and trying to wring out the best situation he can for himself through conniving and defrauding and sometimes just smart, sharp dealing. He's not afraid to do that. But here, he's not able to. He knows that approach to the situation is not particularly powerful. It still leaves him very weak. It's not something that it's not a tool in his at his disposal that can remedy the situation. It's not just him at stake anymore. He can't just think about himself. He's got to think about his family. He's got to think about all his servants and all of the things he has. He has many ties to this caravan moving through the desert, and he has a lot of fear that goes along with him. And in that fear, the trickster, the fraudster, the con man turns to God, prays to God, and tries to hold God accountable to what God has already said. And that's kind of maybe a terminology or a thought process we don't use very often. But in the early days of the family of faith, and really continuing even into the Exodus, it was not unusual or unheard of for a prayer to be offered in such a way where the person praying is trying to hold God accountable to his character, to his promises, to who he was. You have said this, you have done this. I have acted, Sunday morning bulletin article, detrimental reliance. I have acted to my detriment. I have given things up. I have suffered loss based on what you told me, based on what I was assured by you. And based on that, I claim a right, or I assert a right, or I call upon you to honor what you told me. You told me if I came back to my country, to my family, you would prosper me. Here I am. It's time for you to do what you said you were going to do. I did what you asked me to do, what you called me to do. I'm returning home. You said you would prosper me. Okay, here's where it starts. Prosper me out of this difficult situation with my older brother. And that's the prayer Jacob has for God. It's not the kind of prayer perhaps we offer too often today, or that we necessarily want to teach our children to pray, but it's in a sense a very fair prayer. And it's a prayer that it honors God. You are the God of my father Abraham, the father of my father Isaac, and you have shown me chesed, the loving kindness, the steadfast love of the Lord. You've shown me that, and you've shown me your faithfulness, and I'm unworthy of all those things. But now I've acted upon your word. I've acted upon your promises. I'm standing on the promises of God, my Savior. Deliver me. And the threat, the danger is from his brother Esau. So it's he's not particularly a prayerful man, and even in his prayers, Jacob reveals the practical nature of his relationship with God, and how that is really what's driving it for him. It's not so much this awe and this internal spiritual calling, this love of the Lord. Jacob is not necessarily a man after God's own heart, but he is the man God has chosen. He's the man God has called. And he tries to hold God's feet to the fire here and say, take care of me in the presence of this great threat, which is my brother Esau. So it's a very practical prayer, and it's not unlike the ones people offer so often today. You sit down at school and the teacher hands you a test and you realize you forgot all about the test and didn't study for it. You may say a prayer along these lines. God, you've done a lot of good things for me so far. You've given me a good home, good parents, whatever. Help me pass this test. I need your help right now. You told me you would bless me. I'm asking you. You said seek first and everything will be added. Ask and it'll be given to you. I'm asking, give it to me. Give me a passing grade on this test. That's kind of, we offer those types of prayers in the hospital when someone we care about is sick or when we're not feeling good. We ask these types of prayers quite often in our life. Maybe when we go out for a job or something like that. It's that type of very practical prayer. It's not a beautiful, theologically rich prayer that reflects the spiritual growth and beauty of the person who's offering it. It tells us what Jacob is really all about. He's about himself, his family as well, but his desire to live long and do well in the land of promise. So, let's see if there's anything else I wanted to say about the prayer. He offers it in gratitude, what you've done for me. I'm in obedience. I'm doing what you asked, and expectation that God will act as He has promised. So it's one of those prayers that kind of checks a lot of boxes. That is when people try to teach other people to pray. This kind of maybe meets a lot of those requirements or suggestions, but it's still not a very faithful prayer necessarily. It's still it's more of a fearful prayer, and it is a very very practical. He's looking out for himself. Hello, Nell. Hope you and Dale are doing good. Okay, let's move on to verses 13 through 21 of Genesis chapter 32. Through 21 of chapter 32. So he spent the night there. Then he selected from what he had with him a present for his brother Esau: 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 milking camels and their colts, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys and 10 male donkeys. And he delivered them into the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, "Pass on before me, and put a space between droves." He commanded that one in front, saying, "When my brother Esau meets you and asks you, saying, 'To whom do you belong, and where are you going, and to whom do these animals in front of you belong?' then you shall say, 'These belong to your servant Jacob. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he is also behind us.'" Then he commanded also the second and the third and all those who followed the drove, saying, "After this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him. And you shall say, Behold, your servant Jacob also is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me. Then afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me." So the present passed on before him, while he himself spent that night in the camp. Okay. So Jacob has, at this point, expressed gratitude for what God has done. He is obeying the word of the Lord to return home, and he expects God to deliver him. Jacob is also evidently a believer in the old adage, the Lord helps those who help themselves. And he is trying to help himself with this very generous, substantial gift to Esau. Here's all of these things, all of these animals, all of this wealth. We may look at those animals and say, boy, that's going to be a lot of trouble taking care of all those animals. I can't imagine what the vet bill is going to be this year. But that's not how they looked at it. That's cash money in the bank right there, where you have goats and donkeys and sheep and cows and camels and all of that. So, and not only the animals themselves, but arranged in such a way as to assure future reproduction from those animals as well. So, one of the things that's lost on this particular passage, this particular subset of the chapter in translation, is kind of some wordplay going on here. We don't necessarily see it because it's from Hebrew into English, but in Hebrew, the word for face and the word for before was the same word. So you would have to use the context to know what the author or speaker was referring to. But so face and before had the same Hebrew word, pen, and that word is being used interchangeably here. It's going back and forth. So verses 20 and 21, where he says, "You shall say, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us." Then he said, "I will appease him with the present that goes before me. Then afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me." So the present passed on before him while he himself spent that night in the camp. So one way of translating it would be something like, I will appease his face with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will lift my face. So the present passed before him. So this idea of offering this very substantial gift is it's going before you see him. It's not something that's being held back in abeyance, ready to be used if necessary in negotiation. It is an upfront payment, and it's a payment about face. It's before the company to be made to Esau's face so that Esau can save face. You know, Esau is twice exploited by Jacob, and to let Jacob return to the home country and just live there rent-free and without making any restitution for the wrongs Jacob did to Esau. At the very least, the wrongs Jacob or Esau feels Jacob has done to Esau. To let him just come back and act like nothing ever happened would be a tremendous loss of face, a tremendous loss of honor for Esau. He would be humiliated. He would be, you're not much of a man, Esau. If your little brother can hoodwink you twice, go away, come back with all this wealth, and you don't tax him at all. You just let him set up camp and stay there. You got to do something about it. You got to come out of this with something. So Jacob makes it easy for Esau to save face. He puts the gift of restitution right up front and says, here they are. Here's my tax with interest for how I wronged you right up front. Take this payment. Don't be angry. You know, Jesus tells his followers that before you go to the temple, if you've got a beef with your brother, go resolve that beef with your brother. Get right with your brother before you come before God. In a sense, that's what Jacob is doing here. Jacob is saying, here is this payment with interest for what I wrongfully took from you. Whatever value it was, this far exceeds that. And also the kind of implied message is if this isn't quite enough, let me know and we'll do more. But it's an extravagant gift, a lot of wealth being handed over to Esau to buy Esau's honor back for him, in effect. He's paying Esau so Esau doesn't have to kill him. You know, yeah, my brother did me wrong these many years ago, but look at how I've been blessed by it now. Look at this is him acknowledging that he was wrong. This is him paying for his sins against me. And we'll see how Esau responds to it next week. But when we think about resolving conflict, and as I said, originally this conflict wasn't resolved, it was avoided. Jacob is now making real attempts to resolve the conflict. And if you are in conflict with someone you care about, someone maybe that you have to live with, even if you don't perhaps care about them, but for whatever reason, maybe it's a boss you don't like very much, or a coworker you don't like very much. And there's been contention, and there's conflict, and there's been right and wrong, hurt, if you want to dwell with them in peace, there's a really good chance you're going to have to give something up. And you may feel like, I don't have to, I didn't do anything wrong. Try to look at it from the other person's perspective, and maybe you say, well, maybe I didn't do anything wrong, but I can see where he would think I did something wrong. We talk a lot in the churches about forgiving and resolving conflict in a way that is unrealistic. To just expect somebody to walk away from a hurt, just absorb a loss, absorb an insult. And that happens, and that's sometimes what has to happen, but it's very difficult to do that and force that on people. And it is a sign of real spiritual maturity when you can turn the other cheek, when someone can slap your face and you turn the other cheek to them. And that is not easily done. It is not easily done to feel betrayed and let it go. And what we will see most of the time, if you are in if you feel like you need to be compensated in some way, you need some level of restitution, that's not an unrealistic expectation. That's not an unfair expectation. It may be one that is not going to be realized, but it's not unfair. There is this call in Scripture, certainly for mercy, and Paul's emphasis on it's better that to be wronged than to take your brother to court to resolve a dispute. But at some level, and when you think about it, not so much one individual and another individual, but if you think about this as two companies, if you think about this as two nations, Israel and Edom coming together, then you kind of see where the need for reparations, the need for restitution, the need for a payment, a fine, whatever, some form of discipline or punishment in order for there to be reconciliation and continued dwelling with one another. And from Israel's kind of political viewpoint, they could be saying, okay, maybe we did eat them dirty at one point, but we paid for it. We paid for it. We offered to pay for it in spades. We offered to give them everything. And so politically, our hands are clean now. So as we go forward and we try to resolve wrongs, and sometimes these are historic wrongs, so that brothers and sisters can dwell together in unity, a lot of times there's a price that needs to be paid if we realistically want to have it. Yes, it's wonderful if we can just forgive and forget and move on and absorb the loss wherever it lays and just let it stay there. And okay, I'm going to take it. I'm going to be the bigger person. Wonderful if you can do that. But that's not always the case. And especially in the prospect of continued relations. I'm going to be living with Esau now. I'm going to be living in the same basic area. I'm back home and he's over not too far away, and we need to get along. So sometime we'll kind of focus more on the distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation. We're big on forgiveness. We're big on telling people you got to forgive. We haven't really worked out how that impacts reconciliation, how that impacts moving forward in relationship with people. We might tell an abused spouse that he or she has to forgive the spouse that is abusing them. And historically, this has been, we tell women that they have to forgive the husband that beats them or whatever. And ultimately, as Christians, I think that's true. It's a hard message to sell while the bruise is still visible. But the idea or concept of reconciliation is a different concept altogether, isn't it? Your husband beats you, okay, ultimately you need to work through the process of healing and have part of that process be forgiveness. That doesn't mean you have to still put yourself in a situation you continue to get beaten. He can't just beat you. Jacob can't just steal from Esau. He can't just take from him. He can't just steal blessings. He can't just, charge price gouging for a bowl of soup. He can't just keep doing that and get away with it. And Jacob knows that. That's the thing. That's the lesson for us, is this man of God knows I did wrong. I got to pay for it. If I want to live in peace and harmony with my brother, I cannot do it otherwise. And he makes this offer to his brother. So there's a lot of planning and a lot of scheming going on. It does not happen in the absence of prayer. It does not happen in the absence of obedience to God. God's calling is to return to the land. God is not telling Jacob, you need to do all these other things. So Jacob is still scheming and planning and plotting to try to get out of this in the best way possible, including making big payments, including splitting his company, including a prayer that invokes God, that calls upon God to honor his end of the bargain. All of this is going alongside the basic obedience, which is to return to the land of your fathers, return back to what is later known as the promised land. So they don't one doesn't exclude the other. You can have them both at the same time. I don't really want to deal. I've only got a couple of minutes, and I don't really want to deal with the dream, which is a pretty famous scene from the Bible and has a lot of theological meaning. And I doubt very seriously that we'll take up a whole class next week with the dream. But we're going to call it quits there, and we'll finish up Genesis 32 next week, looking at the last 10 verses or so. And we'll finish that and then get into at least get into Genesis chapter 33. So I'm going to leave you hanging a little bit. But Jacob has he's obeyed God, but he's also done his best, done his duty, I guess you could say, has wrangled himself and his possessions and his family into the best position he can muster at this point. He's making the best decisions he thinks he can make in terms of getting out of this either alive or at least with some of his family intact. So all this is going on. Obeying God does not take away all the fear all the time. I mean, it's not, Jesus had to be afraid going to the cross, even though he was acting obediently, even though he'd been promised that God would be with him and that God would take care of him. And you still have fear, and it's the human component. I think maybe the best summation of faith in a single sentence in the whole Bible of what human faith is when the father with the sick child asked Jesus, if you can, heal my son. And Jesus is kind of a little miffed that he says, what do you mean, if I can? Now the father has seen the disciples try to help his son, and they weren't able to. Now Jesus shows up. And if you can, please help him. And Jesus says, all things are possible to those who believe. And the man responds, I believe, help my unbelief. And that's a very human explanation, and a pure explanation, without guile, without pride, um, without arrogance, without an intent to deceive or impress anyone. And I would think having a deathly sick child would take away all pride. You'd be glad, whatever heals my child. I believe, help my unbelief. But there's still, you have such a strong desire for the healing and a hope for the healing, but you're also very aware of the reality of the situation, of the gravity of the situation, that life and death is in the balance here for something more precious than your own life, and the life of your child. I believe, help my unbelief. And, we believe it. I think if you didn't believe, you wouldn't be tuned in right now. But life is hard. People are mean sometimes. Sometimes people are very kind and generous, but sometimes they're mean. People are deceitful. We have treated people poorly at times, and we fear justice and retribution. So we bring that into the equation as well. We believe. We have to trust God to help us with our unbelief, with those little niggling doubts, those little remnants of the flesh that hang on and cling to even the most devout spiritual life. It is hard to get rid of every single tie to humanity, because we are tied. We're tied with the well-being of our bodies. We're tied with our families. We're tied with maybe some of our material possessions. We're tied to earth still. We still have these ties. And as we perhaps become more aware of our own mortality, and perhaps that is mortality that is imminent, we can let go of some of these earthly ties that are not evil. They're blessings from God, but they tie us to earth. And we can let go of the fear and the anxiety that goes along with them. If we can, the sooner we let go of the fear and the anxiety, the more we can really rejoice in the fullness of life that God gives us. But Jacob shows us that obedience and fear and, kind of our own way of doing things, they can kind of all coexist, at least for a time. They're all kind of a muddled mess at some point. So, okay, I tried to get you out on time. You're a little late anyway, but I apologize for that. So let's have a closing prayer, and hope you have a good rest of your week. Hope you enjoyed the relatively nice weather the last couple of days. So will you pray with me, please? Father, we are mindful of all that you have done for us, all the ways you have blessed us, all the gifts you have given us, the faithfulness and the loving kindness you have shown that we do not deserve, but we gratefully accept. Help us show to others the compassion that you have shown us. Help us forgive. Help us ask for forgiveness when we need to. Help us be ready to make sacrifices that bring about reconciliation in the damaged relationships in our lives. Give us love and compassion. Give us empathy. Help us see the world from the eyes or through the eyes of others. And help us grow in our love for you. In the name of your Son, Jesus Christ, we pray. Amen. Okay, have a good evening.